Sarah Mitchell pressed her forehead against the cool airplane window, watching the endless expanse of blue ocean stretch below Flight 447. The gentle hum of the Boeing 757's engines should have been soothing, but instead it reminded her of the Osprey rotors that had carried her team into countless missions across 3 deployments. She shifted uncomfortably in seat 15C, her civilian clothes feeling foreign after years of tactical gear and desert camouflage. The Purple Heart nestled in her carry-on bag seemed to weigh more than her old combat pack ever had. 3 tours with Marine Special Operations Command had earned her that medal, along with a Bronze Star and a reputation that made enemy combatants whisper her call sign in hushed, fearful tones. Phantom. They called her that because she could infiltrate their strongholds, complete impossible missions, and vanish without leaving a trace. But medals and call signs meant nothing in the civilian world, where her biggest challenge was deciding between aisle or window seating. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their position somewhere over the Indian Ocean, still 4 hours from Dubai. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to push away the memories that haunted her. The faces of teammates she'd lost, the weight of decisions that saved some lives while ending others. Dr. Peterson at the VA had told her that coming home was often harder than staying deployed, but she hadn't believed him until now. Around her, passengers dozed or watched movies on their personal screens. A businessman in 14A typed furiously on his laptop. The young mother in 16B tried to soothe her crying infant while her husband slept obliviously beside her. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that the quiet woman in row 15 had spent the last 8 years protecting their right to that normalcy. Sarah's meditate. Ian was interrupted by unusual movement at the front of the cabin. The lead flight attendant, Janet, was speaking in hushed, urgent tones to someone through the cockpit door. Something in Janet's posture, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she kept glancing back at the passengers, triggered every alarm bell in Sarah's combat-trained mind. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong on a commercial airliner, the distinctive metallic click of AK-47 charging handles being pulled back. Sarah's eyes snapped open, her body instantly alert as adrenaline flooded her system. Through the gap between seats, she could see armed figures moving through first class, their faces covered with bandanas, assault rifles pointed at terrified passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm and nobody gets hurt," shouted a heavily accented voice over the cabin's intercom system. The lead hijacker had taken control of the aircraft's communication system. "We are now in control of this aircraft. Follow instructions and you will see your families again." The cabin erupted in screams and panicked sobbing. The businessman in 14A dropped his laptop, his face pale with terror. The young mother clutched her baby protectively while her husband finally woke up to the nightmare unfolding around them. Passengers fumbled for their phones, desperately trying to call loved ones before realizing they were flying over one of the most remote stretches of ocean on Earth. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't panicking. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, as her mind automatically shifted into tactical assessment mode. 5 hostiles, she counted, all carrying what appeared to be AK-47 variants. Somali pirates based on their accents and appearance. This wasn't their first aircraft hijacking. They moved with practiced coordination, positioning themselves strategically throughout the cabin to maintain control over the 240 passengers and crew. The lead pirate, a tall man with distinctive scars across his left cheek, made his way down the aisle collecting phones and jewelry. His companions kept their weapons trained on different sections of passengers, their fingers resting on triggers with dangerous familiarity. These weren't desperate amateurs. They were experienced maritime criminals who had expanded their operations to include aerial piracy. "You, woman in purple shirt," the scarred leader barked at Sarah, stopping directly beside her row. "Phone and jewelry now." His English was broken but understandable, learned through years of hijacking vessels in the Gulf of Aden. Sarah slowly reached for her purse, her movements deliberately non-threatening. But as she handed over her phone, the pirate's eyes narrowed. Something in her demeanor, the way she maintained eye contact without showing fear, the controlled precision of her movements, set her apart from the other terrified passengers. "You are different," he said suspiciously, leaning closer. The AK-47 in his hands was an older model, probably acquired from a black market arms dealer in Mogadishu, Sarah could disarm him in 3 seconds, but with 4 other armed hostiles positioned throughout the cabin, any aggressive action would likely result in civilian casualties. "I'm just trying to get home," Sarah replied calmly, her voice steady despite the weapon pointed at her chest. Inside, every instinct screamed for action. Her muscle memory yearned for the familiar weight of her M4 carbine, for the tactical advantage of night vision on goggles and body armor. But Phantom operated in shadows and silence, not in the cramped confines of a commercial airliner filled with innocent civilians. The pirate studied her for another long moment before moving on, but Sarah noticed he posted one of his men at the front of her section. They were experienced enough to recognize potential threats, even if they couldn't quite identify what made her dangerous. As the aircraft continued its journey over the vast Indian Ocean, Sarah began formulating a plan that would require every skill she'd learned in 8 years of special operations. For the next hour, Sarah maintained her cover as a helpless civilian while conducting a complete tactical assessment of her situation. The hijackers had established a predictable patrol pattern, rotating positions every 15 minutes to prevent passengers from anticipating their movements. Their leader, who she'd mentally designated Alpha, carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd successfully completed multiple hijackings. But confidence could become overconfidence, and overconfidence created exploitable weaknesses. The aircraft's layout worked both for and against her. The narrow aisles limited her movement options, but also created natural choke points where she could neutralize threats without exposing civilians to crossfire. The emergency exits were positioned strategically, though using them at 35,000 feet wasn't exactly an option. Most importantly, she'd identified the air marshal, a nervous-looking man in 8D who kept glancing at the hijackers with the trained eye of law enforcement. Alpha had made a critical error by allowing the passengers to remain in their seats rather than herding them into a single section. This gave Sarah the tactical advantage of operating from an established position while the pirates moved through unfamiliar territory. During her second deployment, her MARSOC team had studied aircraft hijacking scenarios extensively, focusing on the unique challenges of close-quarters combat in pressurized environments. The young mother in 16B was still trying to quiet her crying infant, drawing increasingly aggressive attention from the pirates stationed in their section. Sarah watched the man's body language deteriorate as his patience wore thin. In her experience, stressed hijackers made dangerous decisions, and a crying baby could quickly escalate from minor annoyance to deadly threat. "Ma'am," Sarah whispered to the mother during a brief moment when their guard was distracted. "Try skin-to-skin contact. It usually calms them faster." The suggestion worked. The baby quieted, and the immediate tension diffused. Small victories, but in special operations, small victories often determine mission success. The turning point came when Alpha received what appeared to be disturbing news over his satellite phone. His conversation, conducted in rapid Somali, was clearly agitated. Sarah's language training hadn't included Somali, but his body language was universal. Something had gone wrong with their original plan. "Change of course," Alpha announced to his team in English, ensuring the passengers understood the implications. "We are not going to Dubai anymore. New destination." The aircraft banked sharply to the left, confirming that the hijackers had forced the pilots to alter their flight path. This wasn't a simple ransom operation. They intended to use the aircraft as a weapon. The realization that 240 innocent lives hung in the balance activated something deep within Sarah's psyche. The same protective instinct that had driven her to volunteer for 3 combat deployments now demanded action. She'd sworn an oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that oath didn't expire when she changed out of her uniform. The pirate guarding her section had grown complacent, his attention focused on the attractive flight attendant rather than potential threats. Sarah recognized the tactical opportunity but waited for the perfect moment. In MARSOC training, they'd learned that patience was often more lethal than speed. When the aircraft hit a patch of turbulence, Sarah made her move. The pirate stumbled slightly, his weapon momentarily pointing away from the passengers. In one fluid motion, Sarah slipped from her seat, covered the 3 feet between them, and applied a blood choke that rendered him unconscious in 4 seconds. She caught his falling AK-47 before it could clatter to the floor, checking the chamber and magazine with muscle memory that transcended civilian life. "Stay down and stay quiet," she whispered to the terrified passengers around her. The businessman in 14A stared at her with wide eyes, suddenly understanding that the quiet woman in row 15 was something far more dangerous than she appeared. Moving with the silent precision that had earned her the call sign Phantom, Sarah advanced through the cabin using passenger seats as cover. The air marshal in 8D caught her eye and nodded slightly. He'd been waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Sarah held up 4 fingers, indicating the remaining hostiles, then pointed to herself and held up 2 fingers. She would take 2 targets. He should be ready for the others. The element of surprise lasted exactly 90 seconds. When Alpha discovered his unconscious colleague, his roar of rage echoed through the cabin. "Find the one who did this. Search every passenger." But Sarah had already positioned herself for the next phase of her counterattack. Using the narrow galley space as concealment, she waited as 2 pirates approached her section. Their mistake was clearing the area together instead of maintaining overlapping fields of fire. When they passed her position, Sarah struck with lethal efficiency. The first pirate dropped from a precisely applied sleeper hold before he could raise his weapon. The second managed to turn toward her, but 8 years of close-quarters combat training made the outcome inevitable. "Federal Air Marshal, drop your weapons." The Air Marshal had used Sarah's distraction to neutralize the 4th pirate, his service weapon trained on Alpha, who now found himself alone and surrounded. But Alpha wasn't finished. "You think this is over?" he snarled, backing toward the cockpit with his finger on his rifle's trigger. "This plane becomes missile. If I die, everyone dies with me." Sarah stepped into the aisle, her captured AK-47 held with professional competence. The terrified passengers watched as the quiet woman from row 15 revealed her true nature. "Not everyone," she said calmly, her voice carrying the absolute confidence of someone who'd stared down death in dozens of firefights. "Just you." The final confrontation lasted 3 seconds. Alpha's desperation made him sloppy, his movements telegraphed by panic. Sarah's shot was precise, professional, and final. The aircraft fell silent except for the steady hum of engines and the soft sobbing of relieved passengers. As Flight 447 touched down safely at the nearest military airbase, Sarah Mitchell quietly returned to seat 15C and closed her eyes. The Purple Heart in her carry-on seemed lighter now, its weight balanced by the knowledge that her service had saved 240 innocent lives. The other passengers looked at her with newfound respect and gratitude, finally understanding that heroes don't always wear uniforms. The young mother approached her during deplaning, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching her baby. "How can we ever repay you?" Sarah smiled gently, shouldering her carry-on bag. "Just live good lives. That's payment enough." As she walked through the terminal, she realized that coming home didn't mean leaving her purpose behind. It meant carrying that purpose into a world that still needed protecting. Stories like Sarah's remind us that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized and unsung. Our military veterans carry skills, courage, and dedication that continue serving our communities long after they leave active duty. If this story of courage and sacrifice moved you, please subscribe for more tales of the extraordinary men and women who've sworn to protect and defend. Share this video to honor all our veterans and remember that their service doesn't end when they come home. It simply takes new forms. What other untold stories of military heroism would you like to hear? Let us know in the comments below.